week 15 of the fantasy baseball season. And here's a few hitters I look to drop this week. The first guy, Jess Chisholm Jr. of the Miami Marlins. So Chisholm Jr., he's been placed on the 60-day DL now with a fracture in his back. And he's another guy that's probably not going to be playing again this season here, I believe. Here's Chisholm. He's had the injury, and now that they found the fracture in it and moved him to the 60-day DL, there's no way he's going to be playing this season, especially they're out of it in the NL East and a wild card spot. So Chisholm, he was having a great season. 14 home runs, 45 RBIs, 12 stolen bases, 39 runs scored, a 254 average, and a 325 on base. But right here, we haven't seen him in the last month. With this news here, it pushes him back another 30 days at least on the injury list. And with the back injury, that's something that's going to have to take time. And obviously, it's a big factor in baseball with the way this guy plays the game, stealing bases, high torque swing and all that. He's just a guy right now I don't believe is coming back this season. And keeper and dynasty leagues, maybe you hold on to him. But redraft leagues, he's already been dropped in 12% of fantasy leagues here, Chisholm. And I would drop him because even if he comes back, it's going to be coming back in September for a few at-bats maybe here and there, but I don't think the Marlins push it with Chisholm, with them out of the race of making the playoffs this season. And he's a guy that hopefully has a speedy recovery and has a good season next season and bounces back. The next guy, Isaac Paredes of the Tampa Bay Rays. So Paredes, he came out of nowhere last month, especially with a 3-home-run game versus the New York Yankees. And he was a hot pickup for a little bit here in fantasy baseball, but he's really fizzled out over the last 2 weeks to the month of the season. On the season for Paredes, 13 home runs, 28 RBIs, 28 runs scored, a 216 average, and a 293 on base. But over the last few weeks here for him, no homers, no RBIs, 3 runs scored, 080 batting average, and a 233 on base. And over the last month, hitting 222 with 4 homers and 11 RBIs. So right now, I know he has good versatility in fantasy, first, second, and third. But a lot of fantasy owners have dropped him right now this week here in 17% of fantasy leagues. So the last few games here for Paredes, July 15th versus Baltimore for 3 with a run. July 16th versus Baltimore 1 for 4. July 17th versus Baltimore 0 for 4. July 22nd at the Royals 0 for 3 with a run. And July 24th at Kansas City 0 for 4 in that one. So right now he's not been playing every day since the break return. He sat out July 23rd at Kansas City and July 25th at Baltimore. I know he's been batting 4th or 5th for this Rays team, but the production just hasn't been there. 2 for his last 25 and hitting 222 in the last month. So right now, this is what you got to do in fantasy baseball. You ride the hot hand for a little bit, and if a guy fizzles out and he's not a household name, you got to drop him, and that's what I'm going to do with Paredes this week. Yeah, he could get things going once again, but I just don't see it, and a lot of owners have dropped him in 17% of fantasy leagues. The next guy is Jesse Winker of the Seattle Mariners. So Winker, he had a great season last year with the Cincinnati Reds with 24 homers, 71 RBIs with a 305 average. But his first season here in Seattle, he just hasn't done anything of importance for fantasy baseball, obviously. On the season, 8 home runs, 35 RBIs, 28 runs scored, a 230 average, and a 336 on base. If at least he had some power here, is Winker. He would be a guy that's more salvageable to own in your fantasy league, but the power just hasn't been there. In the last month, only 2 home runs and 6 RBIs with a 240 average in the time. And right now, surprisingly, he's still owned in 59% of fantasy leagues, but he's not bringing anything to the table. Only 35 RBIs on the season. 8 home runs is pretty much nothing for a guy who last season was on a tear to start the year and finished with 24 homers. So July 14th at Texas, 2 for 5. July 15th at Texas, 2 for 5. July 16th at Texas, 1 for 4. July 17th at Texas, 0 for 4. July 22nd versus the Astros, 1 for 4. July 23rd versus Houston, 0 for 4. And July 24th versus Houston, 1 for 2. So it's very surprising that Winker's still batting 3rd or 4th here in this Mariner lineup. But he just hasn't done anything this season. And now he's banked up as well with an ankle injury. And he's a hitter I would drop this week. Yeah, he could get hot and get going, but it would take him a long way, I still think, for me to be persuaded that he turned things around and has fantasy value. The next guy is Tyler Stevenson of the Cincinnati Reds. Stevenson, he was having a great year for the Reds and fantasy owners, especially with the catcher and first base eligibility. But now he's been placed on the injured list here with a broken clavicle, and that's going to easily cost him a month or two at minimum here is Stevenson. So on the season, 6 home runs, 35 RBIs, 24 runs scored, a stolen base, a 319 average, and a 372 on base. Are great numbers for a guy qualifying a catcher, even though he don't play catcher every day for this Red team. But now with the broken clavicle, he's going to be out a while, I believe, here, especially at that catching position is Stevenson. And he's been out since July 22nd here, so the last few games before he went on the injury list. July 10th versus Tampa, 3 for 4, a homer, 2 RBIs. July 12th at the Yankees, 1 for 3. July 13th at the Yankees, 1 for 3 with a rib. July 14th at the Yankees, 2 for 5, a run and RBI. July 15th at St. Louis, 1 for 1. And July 16th at St. Louis, 0 for 4. So Stevenson, one of the only bright spots in a pretty bad season here for the Cincinnati Reds. And now with the injury, there's just no reason to stash him, I think, because he definitely could possibly miss the whole season. I know at the end of July here, maybe he comes back in September, but that clavicle is nothing to think that he's going to come back right away here or even be the same this season is Stevenson. So right now, well, he's banged up and the Reds are out of it as well. I don't see them rushing him back right away, and he possibly can miss the whole season. And the fifth and final hitter I look to drop this week's Jeff McNeil with the New York Mets. And McNeil, he's been a hitting and on-base guy for the majority of the season, but over the last month of the season, he's really struggled. And on the season, 4 home runs, 35 RBIs, 39 runs scored, 2 stolen bases, a 293 average, and a 356 on base. And McNeil, he's known for his average and on base, but he's never going to bring you big power to your lineup for fantasy. He's not going to drive in a lot of runs. 35 this season. Even I know last season he had only 35 as well, so which is better this season and 100 less at-bats as well. But over the last month here, 164 average, no homers, 2 RBI, 6 runs scored, and a 250 on base. And over the last few weeks here, he's 2 for 23 with an 087 average and a 192 on base. So this Met team, they've been struggling to score runs over the last couple weeks here. The last ball game versus the Padres, they scored 8 runs in that game, but this Met team struggling hitting. They're looking for more hitting at the deadline. And Jeff McNeil right now, he might have peaked too early in the season, and he's been slumping over the last month. So if he's not getting that average or on-base percentage up for fantasy owners, he's not really a guy that's going to have much fantasy value. Like I mentioned, the last few games for him, July 14th at the Cubs, 1 for 4. July 16th in a doubleheader at the Cubs, 1 for 8. July 17th at the Cubs, 0 for 4. July 22nd versus the Padres, 0 for 3 with a run. And July 24th versus San Diego, 0 for 4. So right here, he's been struggling, McNeil. This Met team hasn't really been hitting the baseball besides a game or two over the last few weeks here. And he's actually been dropped in 4% of fantasy leagues and owned in 70% of leagues. No doubt about it, McNeil could get hot and get things going once again. And he does play a weak position at second in fantasy. But right here this week, I think he's a hitter I would drop. So that's a few hitters I would drop here for week 15 of the fantasy baseball season.